Hi, Theater Pizzazz. I'm Meredith Heyman. Thanks so much for joining me today to talk Broadway. With me is director and book writer of the first Broadway revival, I can't believe it, of The Who's Tommy, Tony Award winner Des McAnuff. Des, thanks so much for being with me today.
My great pleasure.
Absolutely, mine as well. So how does it feel to have Tommy back on Broadway? Can you believe it's been a little bit more than 30 years?
Yeah, it would have been running opening really 30 years, 31 years ago this month. So, it feels fantastic. I mean, it was a very scary thing to do because it had, substantial success and I dare say even some impact on the field all those years ago. And so there were those that I think believed we were crazy to bring it back and to compete with ourselves. But I couldn't be happier with the way it's turned out. So it's a whole new group of audiences is getting to experience it. And, I dare say it's a stronger production than the first one. I think even by, a substantial distance. So
what makes it better now, do you think?
Gosh, there's so many things. First of all, I think we did it. Pete Townsend and I had a conversation, and we've been working on a screenplay, and essentially there was a kind of moment where we went, I think the world has caught up to Tommy Walker. Perhaps it's time to revisit a stage version, which we immediately got to work on, and I think there's a whole laundry list of things. One is, the whole world is walking around staring into a mirror these days to escape a hostile universe, albeit a black mirror. But that is the story of Tommy Walker. And I think there are so many of the subjects and themes in the piece are part of the national conversation, sexual abuse, bullying, trauma. I think it's recently been discovered that ADHD comes from trauma. There's just, and then also I think the whole last half of the second act where Tommy becomes a kind of charismatic leader, we get the danger of the influencer and society's tendency to follow a guru or a pop star, a political leader off the edge of a cliff. So that's where the story kind of gets to. And I think it's much more vivid than the first version. So that would be the main thing. And then visually, it's quite different. There has a I think it's more subtle. I think the performances are more nuanced. The first production was very much about light and almost exclusively about light. This is certainly about light and shadow.
Now, this revival has like a futuristic concept as a part of it. How did you come up with that and decide on that?
Well, let me say that the timeline for the original Tommy, the album that came out many years ago, was concocted by Pete Townsend with his, I suppose, mentor, Kit Lambert. And they actually had a timeline that stretched from World War I till presumably, 1970, 1969. So it took in more than, 50, 55 years. And we changed World War I to World War II. But it was always on my mind that there's a kind of abstract quality to a Tommy that they had initially embraced. And so when it came time to revisit it, we start the show in the future. And you end up seeing where Tommy, what Tommy turns into, what he becomes. And like most science fiction, the future is based on today. But I do think it gives it a little bit more impact as a contemporary fable. And there are other things that make it seem a little bit science fiction. There are people that go running around, that just appear sometimes in a clinic, and they have silver heads. So their heads are mirrors, really. And this comes from, of course, the fact that Tommy's looking into the mirror when he witnesses the murder and the trauma is initiated. So there are these kind of abstract layers. I mean, to be truly, totally pretentious, you might call the genre here magic realism. There's reality, and then there's Tommy's version of reality, a separate layer, if you like. And so that, I think, gives it a kind of, sci-fi feel.
Yeah, absolutely. Take me back more than the 3 decades of the last revival. How did even working on this come about?
Sure. To give a little credit to a critic who's no longer with us, his name was Dan Sullivan, and he was he's gone now, but he was the critic for the LA Times, and he reviewed the Who at a theater in LA, one of the big theaters, and basically said, "Oh, this is the greatest, rock musical ever written, rock opera, but we'll never be able to live up to the Who. We couldn't do this in the theater." And I read this review, and I said to myself, "Oh, yes, we could." I could blow the roof off the stage house with this. And coincidentally, about 3 years later, my dear friend Michael David, a producer, longtime colleague, came to La Jolla, which he didn't do all that often, and very rarely. And so I thought this has got to be a reasonably big deal. I even remember the date. And he came. We sat on my balcony, which I had a lovely little apartment, which wouldn't have been all that romantic in Tonawanda, but on the beach. And everybody'd say, "What a beautiful apartment." And I said, "Well, just look around. It's not that beautiful." And we were sat on my balcony sipping whatever Chardonnay I could afford in those days, $10 a bottle. And he said, "How would you like to do Tommy?" And I didn't even hesitate. I said, "Yes," right away. And then I met Pete, and we had this. It became kind of a creative love affair, from the beginning. We just found a partnership instantly, and we have a lot in common. I was abused and bullied to some extent, as was he, and both our parents. My dad was RAF as well, and my father was killed before I was born. So I had got a new father at 4, the way Tommy does. So we had a lot of things we could plug into. Now it's much more autobiographical in terms of Pete's story. Of course, he's the principal creator, but I could plug into it not just in terms intellectually, but I could plug into it emotionally. And so I think he responded to that.
And now, so many years later, how is that, as you put it, creative love affair with Pete Townsend? I would hope further and evolved, intensified, now working back on the revival of Tommy.
Yeah, we're in constant touch. I think we've written probably 4 or 5 letters back and forth in the last, 72 hours. I see him all the time. That's been true of the whole time we've known each other. So we've stayed very close the whole time, and I visited him all over the place. Antigua, the south of France, London, obviously. He's visited me. And the thing about Pete that's extraordinary. First of all, he's not a perpetual teenager the way some rock stars. He's very much an adult, and he has an insatiable curiosity about everything. He's a true raconteur. So conversations with Pete are always gymnastic and really inspiring. And we've done a couple of other projects together. In fact, before speaking to you, I was listening to Who's Next, Lifehouse, the box set, which is if you love Pete and his music, it's something you really want to get. It's fantastic. And we also did a movie aimed at young audiences, which hopefully will be in your life, and it's called The Iron Giant. And we produced that together for Warner Brothers some years ago. So we constantly been in touch. So this was, I don't want to say effortless, but you know, we spent a lot of time talking anyway. So it seemed very natural to cook up this new production.
And the show deals so much with trauma and healing, and you shared how you relate to that trauma and the experience of abuse and bullying. How has addressing that in the theater, seeing that in the theater, changed in the course of the now more than 3 decades since the original production?
That's a very good question. I think that it's more, again, in day-to-day conversation. The idea of trauma is now something people can talk about. And if you've been abused, there's less chance that you're going to be ashamed of talking about that. I still think a lot of people are, frankly. Tommy is not a medical textbook, and nor is it a documentary, but it is rooted in truth. Aaron Sorkin, one of the things he likes to say, which I love, is there's a difference between the truth and the facts. So Tommy is really on its most basic level a contemporary fable, but it does burrow into some real issues. And the thing that Tommy suffers from, and having, you know, consulted with several minds that know about these things, psychiatrists and so on, neurosurgeons, what would describe his condition would be a term called conversion disorder, which is a functional neurologic sensory disorder. And the thing that's odd about this disease and disturbing is it does strike neurotypical people. It doesn't go after the neurodivergent. So people will say, have you, who are the actors that are doing this? Well, Tommy is a so-called normal little 4-year-old, which we established very clearly before this horrendous event happens. And it's not just one event, it's a series of events. He sees his father come back from the past. And when you're 4, that's a ghost. And then he sees his father shoot his mother's lover, who's serving as a sort of stepfather. So it has that sort of Oedipal, kind of mythic thing going on. And then his parents say, you didn't see it, you didn't hear it, you won't do nothing, you say nothing to no one ever in your life. And so he's told to clam up. And that's all in, a 10-minute period. Then he has to go through a trial that's traumatic. Then he has to go, they start trying to find out what's wrong with him. And as we know, there's no form that's more abusive in the medical profession for any of us that go there, that have to seek treatment of any kind. It's unusual to find people that are truly compassionate because they have to worry about management. So so he's ushered through there, and all of this, he accumulates a good deal of trauma and disappears into himself. I think that's all stuff we talk about now. 30 years ago, not so much. And we try to be very sensitive to everyone, anybody that suffers from trauma, particularly abuse. And I know it's hard for some people to witness what little Tommy goes through because maybe they've had similar experiences. So we do our best to be sensitive, particularly to the young actors. So, I spend a lot of time with the young actors. In my opinion, it's okay for young people to be on the lookout for predators. Hopefully we never leave them in a situation where they're vulnerable that way, but you never know. And it's important that kids know when to run. It's very important to me that we never in any way do anything that's even remotely abusive to our kids when we're portraying, the abuse that Tommy suffers during the course of the amazing journey. So, and I like to think that sort of sensitivity extends to the whole audience. We're not there's nothing about this story that's exploitive. It is, I think, an important subject to explore.
And as much as Tommy is about trauma, it's also about healing. Has the show had that effect for you, and has that changed and also evolved years later now with this revival?
Did you say guilt? I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you said.
Oh no, it's about healing. As much as
Oh yeah,
trauma,
yes.
it's about healing. And has Tommy had that effect for you both with the original production and now decades later with the revival?
That's a really good question. I suppose, as artists, we work things out through the creations that we participate in making. And I think that's a good point. I do think there's something therapeutic. I wouldn't, again, presume to write a serious essay on conversion disorder, but I'm perfectly comfortable, incorporating it into a story that I'm telling. I'm a storyteller, and I think it does have a kind of therapeutic effect. You're almost forced to talk about and to deal with your personal experience. And it's interesting. The thing that I think is most that probably differs the most from the first production is Tommy has a second epiphany. The first one is I'm free, of course, when the mirror is smashed, and he breaks through the surface of reality and comes back to what you and I recognize as reality. But the next moment is perhaps even more important, and it's when Sally Simpson is beaten up, and there's, and which happens a lot at rock concerts, as we know, and there's a lot of people abused and beaten, and, it becomes a very violent scene. And he has this moment where he recognizes the danger of being a charismatic leader. And he does what very few leaders do. He says to his followers, don't follow me. Mm-hmm. You have your own spiritual journey. Don't try to mimic mine. It's going to get you nowhere. And now there are many political leaders that I wish would say just that. Unfortunately, politicians tend to be addicted to power in the abstract. It's not like they have necessarily anything to accomplish. But I think Tommy is unusual in that way. And he's no saint, but he has this revelation that I think is really moving. And I think that moment is just as important as Tommy breaking through the mirror. And so that's a section we've worked on a lot, the section of the song Welcome, and also We're Not Going to Take It. They become really key moments in this production.
It's such a different, in terms of, leaders and followers, there's an additional realm of all of that now with social media and influencers, obviously, that there wasn't back in the 90s. And I think the show can really speak to that in a really different level now.
Yeah, well, I think when we're talking about trying to move it into the future, I think that was very much on our minds. The pinball is a metaphor for the electric guitar, and it's the relationship between World War II and rock and roll. But then in the course of the play, the electric guitar becomes the synthesizer, and that becomes the computer, and that becomes artificial intelligence as we move, forward along the timeline. Influencers, very, very important. And now that we have social media just basically savaging us and our day-to-day lives, I think we do need to recognize the danger of mindlessly following people, whether it's because they dress a certain way and go to certain parties, or could be a myriad of other things that gives them distinction. One of the people that first brought this up was our young leading man, Ali Borsky, and he was one of the first people I heard speak about influencers in terms of the Tommy story. And I think it's incredibly apt And it's one of the things that makes Tommy exist in the now, which is when theater has to exist.
Yeah, absolutely. To that now, what feels different about directing, mounting Tommy now, and what feels the same about that process versus the original production?
I one thing I would say is over the years, I have a skill. I've developed a craft, and just like if I happen to be making car engines or wheels for that matter, if I was a wheelwright, you tend to get your craft hopefully improves and gets refined as you go forward. And I think that gives you confidence. The theater, as you know, is a collaborative art form. So it's very much about partnerships. And I would say I'm not just more comfortable, but I'm eager to forge those relationships at this point in my life, particularly with the actors. You learn when you're directing film, you learn this, that your closest, your most important collaborators, your most important creative partners on a film are the actors. More important than the DP, more important than even the screenwriter. The really important partners are those actors. And I think, having done just some film, I think that I brought that attitude back into my work on stage. Like anybody, I get cranky once in a while, but you learn that you have to create a safe space for other artists to work in. And God forbid you lose your temper, because if you lose your temper, you no longer have a safe space for people to work in, and you're eroding their work and your own. So I think that's changed a lot. I think I suppose what's similar is the fact that it's visual storytelling. There's very little dialogue. So the way we tell this story is through moving pictures. And as I said, the last production was probably this is going to be really pretentious, but was more about like pop art. So we owed a lot to those artists, the mid 20th century. This one, I think, is almost a little bit more impressionism. We asked the audience to fill in. One of the post-impressionists once said that a great painting should remain unfinished, and the idea behind that is that you ask the person that's looking at the painting to finish it for you, to be actively engaged. And I think I've done that consciously this time. I think in the first production there was almost too much visual information in terms of telling the story. I think while it's still visual, I hope that we're asking the audience to really sit on the edge of the seat. Even though we'll charge them for the whole seat, we only expect them to use the 10% of it at the edge. So,
well, Des, those seats are full. The audiences are packed. You all have to go see the Who's Tommy, this incredible revival now at the Nederlander. But Des, thank you for talking with me.
My great pleasure. I greatly enjoyed it. Thanks.
Thank you. Stay right here with Theater Pizzazz for more Broadway interviews from me. I'm Meredith Heyman. We'll see you next time.